Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, boys and girls. Welcome, everyone. This is Sam-Waiz Institute, and I'm Samuel Omoni Akinsimoy. Good to be here today. Welcome to the analysis of Caged Bird, one epic poem by Maya Angelou. All right, let's dive into it at once, okay? Let's go. These are the things we're going to be covering today. Basically, we're looking at the poet's background. The reason is simple. There's no way a writer will write without having to do with something about them. You can't just get content to write about from nowhere. They must be from the wheres that you've been. I mean, from places you have been personally. All right, either personally or indirectly, the experience of some persons around you could be what you could be relaying, and that's exactly why we have biography and autobiography. All right, if it's biography, it's because someone else is writing about another. All right, so we're going to look at the general overview of the cage bird. We're going to look at what genre the cage bird falls to and what subgenre it is. Don't worry, you're going to understand about that later. Then we're going to be looking at the form of the poem, Cage Bird, as well as the content. Form has to do with what you see, content has to do with what you need to experience or encounter. So you talk about form by the physical properties, the physical features, the visible, all right? Even without going through a poem, you know, you can just tell, like, look at the form of this table of content. You could just tell we've got five major things because they're very much highlighted. Are we together? So you need to go further. You need to interact with a content for you to know what it involves. You need to read the lines. For you to fetch literary devices, you need to understand what the lines are relaying. Are we together? So that's the difference between form and content. All right? Let's get to it. I want to believe that you are here to support us as much as we're here to deliver good services. Please subscribe to the channel and reach out to us on any of his handles. You can reach out personally to Sam-Waiz through the number on our chat on WhatsApp on whatever platform. And let's go into the analysis. Welcome once again. This is Sam-Waiz Institute, and I'm Samuel Omoni Akinsemoye. First, we're looking at Maya Angelou. Who exactly is Maya Angelou? The date of her birth dates back to 1928, and she left us 2014. Now, that explains a lot, right? Especially the date of her birth, okay? Because the slave trade was abolished, yeah, 1964, 1965, all right? And then eventually the heavy bite of slave trade didn't wash away. If you read the books of people like Richard Wright, when he wrote Black Boy, if you read the same person writing Native Son, okay, you might understand a little about what the African Americans went through, because when you see anyone called an African American, it tells you these people, these persons now are leftovers. I apologize if anyone didn't read the right meaning to that word. The leftovers of slavery, of slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade. All right, the reason is simple. These people didn't know where they're from, as at the time they were taken away, their forefathers were taken away into slavery from the Caribbean, from the east and west coast of Africa, and they took these guys off the shores and to the coast of the western states and countries. They didn't even know where they're from. Only their forefathers could tell something about their ancestry, but these guys didn't know where they're from. So even when slave trade was abolished, they didn't know where to go back to. Do you understand? So it made people like Frederick Douglass, to write about their experiences. All right. So when you see people writing about things like this, it is because it is worse for them, because they didn't even know where they're from. Even if you have an idea, if you should look like, okay, my complexion looks like that of people from West Africa, where exactly, which country of West Africa am I from? It's hurting, and you can't really tell about the experiences of these guys except you were in the shoes. But I don't pray you wear such shoes. Such shoes aren't good shoes, huh? So in the poem now, you know, she, Maya Angelou, the poet, had to relay the struggles, the pains, the experiences, the realities, I like to say, of the African Americans. All right. They will always bring that word African before the Americans to let you know you're never an American, you're an African. Even if you don't know where you're from in Africa, you're still an African. Are we together? So this was the basic inspiration to her poem. She had, she came post, slave trade era, yet there was still no total freedom that she could say, yeah, I'm free in America. All right. So wait, stanza one. A free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream till the current ends, and dips his wings in the orange sun rays, and dares to claim the sky. This poem, stanza 1, relays the reality of the free bird. The free bird here, I must let you know, is an analogy, is a symbolism. You know what I mean by symbolism? Is what is used to represent another. Symbolisms, if you need to explain a symbol in a work of art, it will need you to do a lot of narration and explanation. So instead of doing the whole narration and explanation, remember that a poem is what? Um, a genre of literature that enjoys economy of word. You know what I mean by economy of words? It says so much by saying very little. Do you understand what that means? Now, what a playwright would write as a full-blown play, a poet would just write in few lines of poem. But if you undo that few lines of poem, look at what we're doing right now. We're trying to explain this poem, and it's going to take us, a long range of minutes to explain this poem. That's because the poem needs to be explained. That is why poetry is one genre of literature rather, that is not easily unleashed. You cannot easily understand it. All right, it takes expertise. All right, now let's get to it. That's just symbolism. Now, symbolism is one of the ways we lock a whole lot in poetry. Are we together? So, the free bird here um, basically talks about the whites. All right, it's just, let's get straight to it. It's just an analogy for the whites that are free. They've got everything at their beck and call. Everything seems to be easy. They are in charge of the land, of the waters, and of the air. That's more like the bird leaps on the ground now. Now on the back of the wind, the bird is still in charge. You're in charge at the back of the wind as well. So more like they travel through the storm easily. They've got no problem. That's what it means. And then they float downstream to the current ends in charge of the waters. All right, and then dip its wing in the orange sun rays. Now that explains that from dawn to dusk, the free bird enjoys levels of liberty. All right, the orange sun rays talks about a period when the sun sets. All right, and even at that time, when the free bird is going to bed, it is going satisfied with even an assurance that they could claim the sky, like, no, come on, we run this thing, we own this thing, we're in charge here. You get the point now. So that is the reality of the free bird. Okay, let's go. Now we've seen, we are saying stanzas 2 and 3. So stanza 2 says, but the bird that stalks, down his narrow cage can seldom see through his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied. So he opens his throat rather, to sing. Now, what bird is that? But a bird that stalks, what bird is that? Stanza 3 answers that. The caged bird sings with a fearful thrill of things unknown, but longed for still. and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. This talks about the reality of a caged bird. And the black, that is the analogy. The symbolism of the caged bird talks about the black, the African Americans. All right. Now, the free bird talks about the white, the caged bird talks about the black. Let's get to it. So the blacks are, compared or represented in this poem as birds that stalk. Now, they stalk down the narrow cage. The cage does not have enough space. When you stalk in someone, you are very careful about your footings. You get it? I don't know how many of you have stalked someone before. If you're doing that, you want to stop that actually. All right, but then that's by the way. Now, but we're looking at the bird that stalks here, talking about the black. They've got little or no space, no breathing space. So down the narrow cage, you can see the comparison of their environment to that of the free bird. The free bird, we talk about the air, we talk about boundless nature. You get it? But now for the cage bird, we talk about things that have to do with human makings. You get the point now? Can you see the difference of the environment? Free bird, nature, boundless nature, sea, air, land. It goes that wide. But cage bird, we talk about human makings, artificial productions. Narrow cage is not nature, and then bars, rage, these are not natural. All right. Clipping of the wing is not natural. The wing is natural, but then clipping of the wing is not natural. The feet is natural, but then it being tied is not natural. All right. That is to tell you the experiences of the caged bird is not one that is natural. It is one that is human born. Do you get that now? So the caged bird sings with a fearful thrill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. Now, this talks about the fact that the caged bird now that opens its mouth to sing was only singing something that is fearful. Do you know what it means to ever dare to be free to these slaves, to these African Americans? Do you dare know? You can't. You can't really know what it means to want to be free. The thought of being free alone is suicidal. If it's all just about being suicidal, I think it's even better. The death they die are not death that are death. They are the death that kill death. Like kind of they're worse death than just dying. All right? Not all dying is dying. I tell you the truth. There are some deaths that are just the devil is learning to do that from some humans. All right, and that's exactly what it is. And that's why, even at that time, if anyone comes up with an idea of escape, the other slaves don't want to be part of it. They don't want to be part of it because they've seen the hell that those who dare to be free saw. And they don't want to see that in person. Do you get me? So that is why when they sing, they are singing with a fearful thrill. What are they singing about? They are singing about what they don't even know. What is it? They still long for it. They don't know what it is, but they want it. And what is it? It is actually the song of freedom. It's a song of freedom. They don't know what freedom is, but they long for it. They wish they could be free, but they never felt, they never knew what freedom was. Do you understand that at all? Now that's exactly the experience of the caged bird, representing a symbolism for who? For the blacks, a man of color. Are we together? So, and let's go. I'm beginning to get a little bit emotional. So we just go ahead with this. The free bird thinks of another breeze, and the trade winds soft through the sighing trees. Now, this talks about the next level desire of the free bird. Like you're thinking about another breeze, like, oh come on, let's do something else. You got much desire, like I'm tired of this. You've got options. As a free bird, the free bird has got options. And the trade winds soft through the sign trees. More like the easy things, the prepared ground, all right, the adventures. Yeah, these you can only be adventurous when you're free. And look at it. Look at the third line. And the fat worms waiting. There are, birds, they pick on worms. Yeah, if you don't know now, you do. Now, this is like the picture here combine. Can you compare the experience of the cage bird and that of the free bird? Imagine the cage bird looking at this free bird. It's envying it. It wishes, I wish I could be free like you. But I don't even know what it means to be free like you. At the same time. But let's leave that stanza 3. So let's come back to stanza 4. Stanza 4, I'm tired of this place. I want to move over there. I'm tired of that place. I want to move to another place. That is it. And then adventures and explorations are open to you because of freedom. And then there are ready bounties. Like you don't struggle to get things. They come so easy at beck and call. At the snap of a finger, things just answer to you. Now that's what the experience of the free bird is actually. Fat worms waiting on the dawn, bright lawn. By morning, you just know that I'm going to bed right now, and then by morning I know everything is still gonna be alright because I slept fine. I'm waking up better. You see it? And he names the sky his own. In stanza 1, he dares it. In stanza 4, he already called it his own. You can see the desire that came so easily possible for the cage bird, for the free bird, I beg your pardon. In stanza 1, do you remember? In stanza 1, the cage bird was, the free bird rather, was wishing for it. In stanza 4, here, it's already naming the sky its own. You get it? So, but a cage bird stands on the grave of dreams. So this explains the whole thing I've been trying to say. The cage bird is standing on the grave of dreams, where the free bird is having wishes come to pass easily. The cage itself is the grave of dreams. Restriction, there is no greater restriction than not making you be what you want to be. A friend of mine would say there's a difference between doing what you have to do and doing what you want to do. For the cage bird had to do what it had to do, not what it would have loved to do. These are two different things. You get that? So, meaning the cage bird had to give away her own dream. Like, it's over. I would just try and live as long as I could. If freedom comes, fine. If it doesn't, it's all right. Freedom is coming tomorrow. Lingering on such hopes, and they don't seem to come actually. Now his shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. The shadow of the cage bird shouts. Now that tells you the complexion of this cage bird. All right, it's a black. It's a colored. The wings are clipped and his feet are tied. Someone once said, if you're a black, you don't have to be caught with an exhibit. You got your first exhibit, which is actually your color, your complexion. The moment you're black, you're already a suspect. All right? Now, that already infringes the opportunity that could be available to that one. And that infringement of the opportunities or possibilities is what we call the clipping of the wing and the tying of the feet. All right? When the feet are tied, they wouldn't go as fast as you might have to be limping. You get the point? And you might be hopping, actually. Then when the wings are clipped, a bird that is meant to fly in the air will be subjugated and limited to ground peckings. Whatever you find on the ground, you take, and then it exposes that bird to predators, So that's exactly how it is. So because this is the reality of the caged bird once again opens his throat to sing. What does he sing about? The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. This is a repetition of stanza 3, and the repetition is total. Yes, it's total. So I really want to just take the literary devices quickly. All right, let's do that, right? Or we just go further and then we get back to literary devices, because you might want to refer to the back pages, all right, the previous slides, for you to catch a glimpse of the literary devices, all right? Because I'm going to take the literary devices line by line where you can find them in the different stanzas. Are we together? So, having said that, I'll just go ahead and talk about the thematic preoccupation and other things. We'll talk about the literary devices very much later. Now, some persons will say this book, in the book, the writer said no. Now, it will interest you that it is very important to just name it straight. In the poem, all right? So the genre is poetry. So this is a poem. I know some of you might feel this is not necessary to come in this analysis, but some other persons will know this is very necessary, because some persons don't know how to just state it categorically. As a student of literature, you should be able to say headache, stomach ache, fever, what type of fever it is, you should know. All right? Because you don't just say illness. Which of the illnesses? Which one? That's why we say it's not just a book, it's not just a work. Which work? So, poem. It's a poem. Then, what type of poem is it? It's a free verse. Why is it a free verse? If you look at stanza 1, 2, 3, they are not the same. Stanza 3 and stanza 6 are the same because it was repeated just exact. All right? But you see some stanzas have 4 lines. Some stanzas have, 6, 7, 8 lines and all of that. So that exactly is why we call it a free verse. Excuse me. And another thing we need to know here is the fact that a free verse does not have a particular structure. What do I mean by it doesn't have a particular structure? I mean, you can say it has 10 syllables in all through the lines, or 5 syllables, or 8 through the lines. No, that's not the case. So that tells that is a free verse. A free verse is a poem you write just anyhow as it comes to you. Now, can I explain why free verses come this way, especially with poems like these? It's simple. Because of the outpour of emotions. Do you get me? Now, as at the time this poet personnel is writing, you can expect, I don't know how many of us will be able to write this kind of poem and you want to write it coordinatedly. More like you are very organized writing it and you're taking your time through every bit of the line to calculate the number of syllables in each line and all of that. You're having a runover of emotion. Do you get that? Because of the runover of emotion, it tells also in your writing. Are we together? And that's why the 6 stanzas are not the same, except stanza 3 and stanza 6, that is just the same. So can we go on now? Let's look at the themes. Some other times, some questionnaire, questions in exams could come asking the thematic preoccupation. When some of us hear some of these English is in quotes now, we get petrified, we get scared a little. You don't have to be scared, all right? So just know it's still talking about theme. What does the poem border around? The poem borders around freedom versus bondage. And I think that's very simple to understand, yeah? Because if you look at it very well, the theme of freedom is attached to the free bird. The theme of bondage is attached to the caged bird. But can I tell you something? the theme of freedom is also subtly attached to the cage bird. Now, the subtle part of it there is the fact that the cage bird was not actually free, but had the desire for freedom. All right? Now, look at a goat that is tied to a peg. No matter how long the rope is around the goat does not feel free. Are we together? So that's exactly what it means. No matter how much you think they've got some level of freedom and all of that, that is still not freedom, please. And that's exactly why we're talking about the freedom here having to do with the cage bird and the free bird. The side or the perspective of freedom with the free bird is not the same perspective of freedom with the cage bird. For the free bird, it is the simple meaning of freedom. For the cage bird, it is what? The desire for freedom. In fact, freedom was pictured as something fearful and unknown to the cage bird. But bondage is the reality of the cage bird. Are we together? So you might want to echo some lines. What do we mean by echoing? We mean repeating some lines from the poem. All right? You know, like his wings are clipped, feet are tied. All right? Like that. That shows bondage. All right? But you could talk about freedom for the free bird, and then you could talk about daring to even claim the sky, and later on saying he even owns the sky. You get it? So these are two different things. All right? So that explains their realities anyway. So now let's look at the next theme, the theme of pain and pleasure. So we are doing this juxtaposition. Why? Because there are two scenarios here, that of the free bird and the cage bird. So when we talk about the free bird, we're also talking about what? The cage bird. So while the cage bird was experiencing pain, the free bird was experiencing what? Pleasure. That's understandable, right? So you could echo some lines, talk about the pleasure in the free bird's experience and the pain in the cage bird's experience. Are we together? Now, let me go a little bit to talk about the bondage here too. That the bondage here talked about has to do with also the bondage of anger. All right, the poet personally did not hesitate to tell us that the cage bird was actually also clamped, that is, imprisoned in anger. When you feel what they've done to you, you feel it so bad, you can't take it, and then you're very much angry. Maya Angelou is saying that is one prison you've put yourself in. Anger is a prison itself. All right. So please, I just felt that's necessary and very, very fundamental to add to this poem. This is to tell us that Maya Angelou is not trying to say you need to get angry at the whites because you're black after reading my poem. If you do that, you're also going to be restricted in your own bars of rage. And that should be line 4 of stanza 2, all right? So let's just go ahead and talk about the next theme, which is the theme of nature. Remember, we talked about the realities of the free bird coming and tied to nature, yeah? So we talked about the free bird leaps, we talk about the wind, we talk about downstream, talk about current, we talk about orange sun rays, we talk about the sky, nature and its beauty, following pleasures. All together. All right. So that talks about nature. Excuse me. Let me clear my throat. But I'm not a cage bird. All right. Let's go now. And then we talk about survival of the unfeeders. I love this because I don't want to talk about hope. I kind of don't like the common things. So instead of just saying theme of hope, I chose to express it as survival of the unfittest. Now, do you know why that is? Yes, let's look at it from the angle of hope. The hope here of the caged bird is actually not a hope that is hopeful. I don't know if you understand that, neither do I myself. But let me try and recap that in simpler terms. They are not even aware of what they are hoping for. Did you see that in line 3, right? I mean, stanza 3, I beg your pardon. Yeah, I think stanza 3, line 3, something like that, you see that. they hope for something still or things unknown. You know, so that talks about the fact that it's not just another hope. This is a hope that is not hopeful. They are not even they are not sure of this hope. So the hope is a hopeless hope. And that is why we talk about survival of the young fetus. Then we could talk about uncertainty. All right, uncertainty, theme of uncertainty. Now that is still in the same line of survival of the young fetus. You know, the only difference between uncertainty and survival of the young fetus is the fact that the poet personally reveals that the caged bird still hopes. You get it? He said, of things unknown, yet hope for still. I hope that echoing is correct now. I hope that that's exactly how it is in the poem. You could go back to cross-check, please. So that's how you echo too, all right? You could echo, you could paraphrase. If you're not too sure, then paraphrase it. But if you're very sure, then you want to put it in quotation mark as well, all right? Do you understand that? So survival of the fittest is because despite the uncertainty, the caged bird is still hoping, still believing in what he does not know, what he is not sure of happening. Now, that is a little stretch to survival of the unfittest. So they live for the next day, they live for the next minute, they live for the next second, they live for the next hour, they live for the next breath. All right? Just as much as you can survive, just try and survive. Until, if eventually freedom comes, we'll be free. If it doesn't, yes, then we know we die hoping. All right? But then the hope, now back to the theme of uncertainty, is not certain. Do you get it? So I think that answers it, right? Okay. So we were talking about why you need to subscribe. I'm not done. We need to go to the literary devices. And definitely we are going to do the literary devices. All right. So let's look at quickly the poem. The poem is hugely built around the theme, of bondage. But then that does not mean that we are going to review that. I mean, we are going to talk about that in literary devices. Themes are themes, literary devices are literary devices. So if you can, please try and see how you get the poem. If you have it, you want to look at it, and then I'm just going to say some things, and then I want you to check it up. Because I want to be sure you're following this video and you're not just playing it and just watching. All right, this is a literary analysis. You need to be following through the process. This is our own scientific laboratory or theater. So place your poem on your dissecting table and let us start dissecting it. So a free bird leaps, I talked about symbolism already. All right, from the title, let's even start from the title. Caged bird, that is symbolism. Symbolism representing what? The blacks, straight off. All right, it's really not talking about a bird here. And that also could stand for metaphor. Metaphor in that the blacks are compared directly as though they are caged birds. So instead of saying the blacks were like caged birds in America, you say they're caged birds straight off. So we're like caged birds would have made that a simile, but making it direct makes it what? A metaphor. Is that clear? So that free bird now is now another symbolism for the white. All right, we're good? So good. So, and that free bird leaps, all right, on the back of the wind. We talked about that being a symbolism for opportunities, and floats downstream till the current ends and dips his wings in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. Now, and dares to claim the sky, there is hyperbole, meaning you want to say, I own the sky. Now, that is just, I know a lot of persons will say hyperbole, but if you look at the transcription, it's hyperbole. So, and I want us to do the right thing and say the right things, all right? Good. So can we talk about it again? You know what hyperbole is? Hyperbole has to do with, intentional exaggeration. You want to let people know that these guys can aim for anything and get it. So you say dares to claim the sky. So that's exactly hyperbole. And then I like to talk about enjambment. Enjambment is a major dominant device in the poem. What do I mean by dominant device? You can see it happening throughout the entire poem. All right, from stanza 1. What is enjambment? Enjambment is when you see a line running into the other one before you can get the full meaning of what the poem is talking about. So a free bird leaps. That's not the end of that. Leaps where? If it should be read as a free bird leaps on the back of the wind. You see it? So that is the full line. But because that line is broken into two, that is enjambment. Another word for enjambment is run on line. What I say? Run on lines. RUN-ON hyphen lines. LINES. All right. So, and floats downstream till the current ends and dips his wings. Now, and dips his wings what? In the orange. So that is another enjambment. All right. So if you look at it again, but a bird that stalks down his, you see it, that's enjambment. His narrow cage can seldom see through his, bars of rage. His wings are clipped, and you see it, that's enjambment, and his feet are tied. So that's enjambment, also known as run-on lines. Can we leave that enjambment now? Because if you look through the poem, you see it dominating. Then can we quickly just, excuse me, talk about repetition? Now, let me talk about repetition in this way to say there are types of repetitions. In this case, we have what we would rather call refrain. Refrain is a type of repetition that comes after a particular interval. Now, you see after stanza 1, stanza 2, there came a particular stanza. And this stanza was repeated again as stanza 6. You realize that the repetition of this stanza comes after 2 stanzas. So that is more like what you do in church. You take a hymn. After one hymn, there's a chorus. After another hymn, there's a chorus. So more like after stanza 1, there's a chorus. After stanza 2, there's a chorus. So this looks like the chorus. That's why it's called refrain. Are we together? So this is not just repetition. It is what? Refrain. But there is still repetition in this poem. Repetition of the word his. His is used to represent the free bird. His is also used to represent the caged bird. Why? That's to tell you both the caged bird and the free bird are human. They are meant to be equally treated, but one has privilege than the other. That's simple. Do you get it? So let's talk about personification. Personification is also present in the poem. You can see we talked about the free bird leaps. Leaping is one characteristic of a human being, all right, but then it's given to a bird that the bird leaps. But that's not all. The use of his, H-I-S, the singular pronoun, all right, his, there is very human, but it's attached to a bird. So the bird there is treated as a person, as a male. Now that is also personifying that bird. Do you understand? Now I'm trying to see if there are other instances of personification. Yeah, we have that in the sign trees. The sign trees. I may not be able to get all of them at this point because I didn't intend it for this lesson to get to this point this long. So I'm trying to see how best I'll cut it short. So let's see sign trees. Sigh, to give a sigh. Now, that is something that is only possible with humans, but this time it is attached to trees. All right. Fat worms waiting on a dawn bright lawn. Now, that talks about alliteration. Alliteration is present in the w for warm and waiting. Are we together? So that talks about the repetition. There's a difference between alliteration and consonants. Alliteration is repetition of a consonant sound, at the beginning of words in a line of poetry, while consonance is a repetition of a consonant sound at the middle or end. All right? So, like we have lawn and on in that same line. The n being repeated in on, dawn, lawn. All these are talking about consonants. All right? The repetition of na at the end of, in fact, waiting, on, dawn, lawn. These are all consonants effect. But the repetition of wa, and the repetition of t in the line before it, trade, all right, and then trees. These are all alliteration. All right, I really don't like about talking about taking time to talk about alliteration because I feel these are common literary devices. You find them in almost every poem. Look at line 1 of that same stanza. You have bird, breeze, which is the b. All right. So can we leave that already? Yes, let us leave it already. So we talked about symbolism. Yeah. Cage, bars of rage. We talked about that. We talked about um, the grave of dreams, the cage, the restriction is limiting. All right. And it is sad that we need to just cut it short because it's getting longer than I thought it would. So let's talk about the tone. Imagine the way this poem was relayed. You can see it's really talking about a sad one. All right. So the tone is melancholic. That is, it's sad. It's very emotional. All right. And this time, negatively emotional. All right. So it's a very sad tone, and the mood of the poet. You get the tone of a poem by the language used. When someone is happy, there's a way the person will talk. When someone is sad, there's a way the person will talk. So the way people will use words will let you know whether they are happy or not. If someone comes to you to say, hello, where's your dad? You will just think, you won't attach any other thing to it, right? Because you just believe he's trying to get to know your dad's whereabouts. But then if someone comes to say, hello, come here, where's your dad? If someone asks you, who's your dad? You might think he does not know your dad and is interested in you. But when someone says, who is your dad? Who is your dad? You know that he's trying to say your dad is a nobody. The person didn't actually say it, but the way the person said it has shown that. So, and then you will already know this person is angry or proud. Things like that. So that's how you know tone and then mood. So the mood you are in will determine the tone with which you speak. Are we together? So that is it. And the language of this poem, if you ask me, is very simple and accessible. But then this is relative because to some persons who are not familiar with certain vocabulary, they might feel it's complex. But then I feel then that is based on personal limitations of language understanding. All right. I would love to know what you want us to talk about if you have any. All right, because just feel free to write to us and I'll be here to answer your questions. It's time, and I really appreciate you for watching up to this time. Thank you so much for your support. God bless you, really good. From all of us at Sam-Waiz Institute, we love you. Mwah. Bye. And all the best in your exams. Yeah.